The British Broadcasting Century podcast returns to our chronological tale of the early Beeb, and we've reached August 1923, so previously on the British Broadcasting Century. 9 months into existence, the British Broadcasting Company now has stations in London, 2LO, Manchester, 2ZY, another pre-BBC station, Birmingham, 5IT, Newcastle, 5NO, grand launches in early 23 for Cardiff, 5WA, and Glasgow, 5SC stations, but some of those early studios are in need of a revamp. The earliest ones began under companies like Marconi, Western Electric or Metropolitan Vickers. But now the BBC's taken over these studios, isn't it time for something new? This time, on the British Broadcasting Century, we dive into August of 1923, and it's a time when the BBC is building behind the scenes a little more. So there are new studios in Birmingham and Manchester, an update of what's going on in Scotland, plus the first gardening on radio and the Radio Circle. A packed episode telling you all about August 1923 on the British Broadcasting Century.
Hello, this is Paul Carenza calling. This is London Calling.
Hello, welcome along. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your patience as well. If your key interest is the chronological moment-by-moment account of what happened in the early days of British broadcasting, we've had some specials, a Christmas special with some classic BBC Christmases, and last time some authors on different moments of broadcasting history. So this time we get firmly back into attempting to move the story forward. We've had June and July with the first sports broadcasts and the wireless manhunt, so now August 1923. I should say as well, we're building towards a moment in late August where we get simultaneous broadcasting. That's networking, essentially sending a programme from one station in the country out to the others. And that's a key moment in the shift of the BBC, of London taking over. Spoilers. And also, it's the conclusion of the Sykes Report, this inquiry from the government into what the BBC could, should and would be. Question still being asked today in 2025, you could ask. My name is Paul Carenza, and once again, this is nothing to do with the present day BBC, though we are always happy to collaborate with them. So if you're a producer or a director general and would like to do something together, let's get in touch. Although there are one or two times this year where that's already happening. Before we delve into August of 1923, though, two little moments of news. Beep, 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 beep. Firstly, last time we mentioned the Listen In event at the Bodleian Library in Oxford. Obviously, the exhibition continues. You could visit that up until the end of August in this year of 2025. And Sunday, 2nd of March, live on Radio 3, it's a sort of a reenactment of moments of those diaries that they have discovered at the Bodleian Library, thanks to B.T. Rubens, who joined us last time. Her marvellous book is Listen In, How Radio Changed to the Home, and do listen to her programme. We'll put the link in the show notes, and hopefully it'll be there for some time. And you may have noticed as well, there is a bit of a campaign, Save Audio Drama. We're a bit behind the curve on this one. But with Radio 3 dropping their drama slot, really it's all on Radio 4's shoulders now, and they don't have an opportunity for long-form drama broadcasts at the moment. So keep an eye on social media for opportunities to get behind that cause. And just, always nice to shout a little bit about what we want on the BBC. And if you would like more audio drama, let them know. Simple as that. I wonder if the Radio 3 ship has sailed, but maybe could we possibly encourage Radio 4 to have, therefore, longer dramas instead. Radio 4 Extra is there doing its thing in terms of archive, but it'd be lovely to have a longer form drama slot where we could explore who knows what. Ambridge, the Galaxies, Milkwood in Wales. Wonderful audio drama has been gifted to us in the last 100 years. Let's hope it continues for 100 years yet. And the final piece of news before we get back into our timeline is we have episode 100 coming up. That's quite exciting, isn't it? That was a little gap for you to say, yes, it is, Paul. What do we do for our 100th episode then? Well, I've been umming and ahhing about this, and I thought maybe it'd be quite nice to throw it open to you, good listener. Do you have a favourite moment of early broadcasting? Maybe something we've covered already, or maybe something that we would have coming up. But something about the early broadcasting story. It could be pre-BBC, could be those magical moments of Writtle in Essex. It could be DJ Gertrude Donisthorpe in her field in Worcester in 1917. Or something of the BBC era. Reith, Arthur Burrows, the launch of radio in Wales or Scotland. More of that this episode. Whatever you think is a golden moment of the very earliest moments of broadcasting, you could record us a voice note maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute, maybe a little bit longer. Tell us it in your words, your desert island British broadcasting moment. Or if you prefer to use the written word, pop it in an email and I'll read it out for you. So if you'll be willing and able, do send it to me, paul@paulkerensa.com. That's Paul at paulkerensa.com. And you've got about 3 episodes to get that done because episode 100 is coming up. But so to this episode. It's August 1923. So let's begin with Birmingham and Manchester. So these were 2 of the first 3 BBC stations, the other being London, of course, which has already moved from Marconi House to Savoy Hill. And at Savoy Hill's opening, Lord Gainford, the chairman of the BBC, did promise that Birmingham and Manchester would also get upgrades rather soon. The intent was that by around late June, Birmingham and Manchester would be leaving their pre-BBC homes, built by the wireless companies rather than the Beeb, and they would move into proper BBC premises. There are always delays, so here we are in August 1923. The old 2ZY studio closed down, and this, over at Trafford Park, was a place where, to begin with, the engineers would be mucking in doing children's programmes. The very first.
I think we were the first people to start children's programmes from the very beginning, the 15th of November.
Kenneth Wright, BBC pioneer in Manchester.
In 1923, we started giving weekly talks in French, teaching French, and then Spanish and German, and eventually Italian as well. These things went on week after week. We also had reviews of books. We had weekly talks about gardening and the kind of things that other people adopted, if I may say so, after us.
Kenneth Wright there, the first to head up 2ZY in Manchester. But in this shuffle, he moves then to London, in fact. And yet he always missed being Uncle Humpty Dumpty.
Kenneth Wright, the station director, was Uncle Humpty Dumpty.
Reginald Jordan of 2ZY Manchester.
Another of our friends was the Sandman, who used to sing the children to sleep. And I rejoiced in the name of Dinko, the foreman of the Pixies.
So Manchester needs a new station director, and they get Dan Godfrey, a very musical man, and Manchester, of course, has ever since been home to music on the BBC. Concert orchestras, and back in those days, the 2ZY Operatic Party and Concert Party.
Business really started at Metropolitan Vickers as an offshoot in the research department of Metropolitan Vickers.
An engineer of the Manchester control room from the 1920s to the 1950s, Jim Grundy.
Until August 1923, when the BBC, the British Broadcasting Company, obtained premises and occupied premises with its own transmitter in Dickinson Street in the city. We were there until December 1924, when we moved to palatial premises level with the bed of the OL in 1924, and then super accommodation in 1928 Piccadilly. That briefly is the setup, you see.
From Wireless Weekly, 1st of August 1923. Thursday evening, August 2nd, marks the final broadcast transmission of the Manchester station from the works of the Metropolitan Vickers Electrical Company Limited at Trafford Park. This final programme promises to overflow with surprises and comical stunts, and it behoves all those radio enthusiasts who desire to hear something out of the ordinary run of broadcast transmissions to get right on to 385 metres and stay there. The final broadcast from Trafford Park in Manchester on the 2nd of August 1923 included some early 2ZY favourites. Women's Hour had Fashion by Miss Nora Shandon. New Careers for Girls, House Decorator was their theme there. Mrs. C.S. Peel's Wireless Cookery Book, a favourite across many BBC stations. A Fairy Story and the Children's Hour, My Dream Fairy of the South Downs. There's a Girl Guides and Boy Scouts Pow Wow. And at 6:45, a special programme reminiscent of the early days of 2ZY with Louise Benny, aka Cousin Benny, aka the Lady of the Magic Carpet. The first children's broadcaster, not just at 2ZY, but the first children's broadcaster ever on the BBC. So she returned for one final broadcast on 2ZY. And at 10, another reminiscent programme of 2ZY, special overture from the Oxford Picture House, the 2ZY Lift, a sketch as played on a much earlier occasion by the staff of the station. I would love to know what the 2ZY Lift was all about. And 2ZY's first studio closed at 10:40 with addresses by Arthur Burrows, the director of programmes, and first voice of the BBC, the Etude in K sharp by Spotsoffski. K sharp? And finally, at 10:55pm on the 2nd of August, chat on 2ZY equipment with demonstration of various types of microphone, the national anthem, and the last good night from the old studio. The studio ghost looks round, burial forever of the carrier wave. An ominous listing in the Yorkshire Post.
I think many people thought we were drunk, but nobody on that station was ever drunk, but we were just young and hilarious and thoroughly enjoying something new and exciting.
That's Metropolitan Vickers research engineer Hugh Bell, and this is from Wireless Weekly. On Friday, August 3rd, the Manchester station will make the first broadcast transmission from its new and permanent home in Dickinson Street, situated in the centre of the city and within a few hundred yards of the most important music halls, theatres and the well-known Free Trade Hall. The possibility of permanent landline connections with these places would appear to be a thoroughly practical proposition. We may yet enjoy the annual Christmas season feast of music from a microphone transmitter in the Free Trade Hall by listening in to the 100 instrumentalists of the renowned Halle Orchestra, supported by one of the largest organs in the north of England. The rendering of the Messiah by this combination as accompaniment to the choir and soloists of the first rank has become an annual Christmas institution in Manchester. As for the launch itself, the Band of the Irish Guards was brought in and Lord Gainford, the chairman, gave a speech. But not everybody was happy with the move. The change from Trafford Park to the centre of Manchester, a distance of about 4 miles, will no doubt have the effect of creating widespread dismay in the hearts of crystal users on the Stretford side of the city, to whom signals were previously of great strength. So this new Manchester city centre studio then, 30 feet by 14, it was a 4th floor cotton warehouse. To reach it, how would these many instrumentalists get to the 4th floor? Well, they had a heavy goods lift and it was this hoist and a pulley that you'd pull yourself. So artists, put down your cello, your trumpet, your umbrella and get yanking. That's the only way to actually get to that 4th floor. To Birmingham then, for what they are doing. Just like Manchester, the new station was going to be in the heart of the city. They'd realised by now that you could link up with theatres and concert halls, so you've got to be near them so that a cable could reach. Plans for Wireless Gala Night, how 5IT's central studio will be opened. Birmingham Evening Dispatch, 1st of August 1923. The official opening ceremony of 11th of August, the Great Night, will be performed by Sir Herbert Austin MP, and he'll be supported, it's hoped, by Lord Gainford, chairman of the British Broadcasting Company, Sir William Noble, a director of the company, and he headed up the broadcasting committee pre-BBC, Mr J.W. Reith, general manager, Mr Arthur Burrows, director of programmes, Dr J.R. Radcliffe, president of Birmingham Experimental Wireless Club, Mr Appleby Matthews, great name, conductor of the Birmingham City Orchestra, and others. Thanks as ever to our newspaper detective Andrew Barker for providing so many of these newspaper articles from back in the day. Do join our British Broadcasting Century Facebook group to see more of what Andrew has found. He posts them 100 years exactly after they were first published. In addition, there'll be the attendance of the Royal Air Force Band, which is an attraction of wireless broadcast in Birmingham, is a notable favourite. The talk for the evening will be given by Major J. Hall Edwards, who will discuss the interesting question, do fairies really exist? The reconstruction of the premises above New Street Picture House as a home of Midland broadcast is proceeding apace, and in the words of Mr Percy Edgar, the popular director of 5IT, everything is shaping well for the great night. We'll come back to the opening of the new Birmingham station shortly. But elsewhere, this over in Scotland, from our previous guest on the podcast, Graham Stewart.
Alex Swinton Patterson joined 5SC in the summer of 1923. His responsibility was for talks on appeals and petty cash and schools broadcasting. The BBC's policy of keeping station staffs as low as possible meant that certainly at first it was just Herbert Carruthers, the station manager. He had other duties. He was conductor of the orchestra. He served as an accompanist. He selected the speakers for the talks. And then he was joined by Kathleen Garskadden. She was initially lady announcer and later organiser of women's and children's programmes. And then Mungo Dewar arrives. He looks after programme compilation. He arranges the drama outputs. He even takes part in some of the plays himself when they couldn't find other actors. Interestingly, Patterson was described by Reith as being slow of thought and deeds as a result of having been gassed in the First World War. But Reith always had a great respect for those who'd fought for their country, so it wasn't uncommon to see employees with war injuries working throughout the BBC.
Graham Stewart joined us on an earlier episode to tell us more about Scottish broadcasting. He's writing a book about it as we speak. So this is a perfect time to give a further update of the general scene of things on Glasgow 5SC. Here's Graham.
So the station was much criticised in those early days and weeks, and the greatest source of complaint was the poor quality of the 5SC orchestra, which, it was called an orchestra, but in truth it was a quartet. It had a piano, a cello, a violin and a flute. And if you look at the letters pages in the local newspapers at the time, here's just one, for example, who says the standard aimed at appears to be that of the Saturday afternoon concerts in the corporation halls and the concert parties in the parks, which are the cheapest forms of entertainment in the city. And then, 3 years later, you still had complaints coming in. Somebody here writing about the performance of Schubert's Unfinished Symphony. He says, what musician can be bothered listening to a performance of a classic symphony by a band lacking several of the instruments which the work demands, when he can hear such works performed every year by the Scottish Orchestra with complete instrumentation? But the additional problem was Carruthers' preference for serious music. The station sounded quite heavy. It was serving up an endless diet of long and dreary sonatas and symphonies and orchestral concerts. As one listener wrote to the Evening Times, working people don't want to learn classical music. They have no time to do so. People wanted to have fun just as much as they want to have fun now, and 5SC wasn't really providing very much of that. And then there were the talks. When workers came home at night to settle down to their dinner, 5SC was broadcasting what many thought of as weary talks and educational lectures and prosy elocutionists. These were delivered often by local university professors. You had courses on subjects including agriculture and engineering and Scottish history and the likes. You had talks of women as well. They were confined to the afternoons. They took on more of a domestic theme. But often they were pretty tedious as well. SOS messages, they were read out, not just for missing persons, but even for missing budgies, cats and dogs. On one occasion, there was even an appeal for someone's missing umbrella put out on the air.
Thank you, Graham Stewart. He will return in a couple of episodes' time when we come back to the Glasgow station for a notable dramatic performance of Rob Roy in late August 1923. Meanwhile, let's go to London, where things were also rather experimental. 8th of August 23, the Pall Mall Gazette report on a bold experiment with an elephant. Just ask a Blue Peter presenter, broadcasting with an elephant is fraught with risk. A mahout, one who knows how to talk to an elephant in language it can understand, will broadcast commands from the London station, and the elephant, with the loudspeaker and a receiving set on its back, will walk about the zoo. Will the elephant obey orders? Apparently not. The broadcast the next day heard elephant trainer Saeed Ali giving instructions from London to Allo, but a mile away at the zoo, the elephant took no notice. It would appear that an elephant requires gesture as well as voice. Very public way of finding out. And this elephant tale prompts what may be the BBC's first topical parody. Hear that at the end of this episode, thanks to comedy historian Alan Stafford. 2 days later, on the London station, apparently the BBC's first gardening programme.
Now, here is Marion Cran, who is going to give you another of her garden talks.
Well, Marion Cran, often credited as the BBC's first gardening broadcaster, sounded like this.
Here we are. We've touched the pit of the year's darkness. The shortest day is over, and every hour brings us climbing back up to the sun, back to the long, sweet twilights. We're climbing up again. Soon we shall feel the stir of the sap and the cry of the wild heart calling to the open fields. That's the sound I listen for through all my days in the heart of every fellow creature I meet, the only note I care for. Hard to hear in the roar of these latter days.
The first gardening programme of the BBC. Although, as ever, I have to ask, was she the first? Because 2ZY Manchester on the 27th of November 1922 had gardening notes. That's all we know.
We had weekly talks about gardening. the kind of things that other people adopted, if I may say so, after us.
2LO on the 29th of March 1923 had Mr. E.G. Evans on Gardening in March, and 5WA Cardiff had a regular Chat on Gardening programme weekly from Richard Tresida from the 4th of April 23. That's the same time they started weekly sports programmes. Again, Cardiff starting a regular genre before anywhere else, but getting no credit whatsoever anywhere. I've not seen a book, a website, a mention of it, but thanks to the BBC Programme Index, you put in gardening, and looks like, Cardiff was the first one to do it regularly. And yet we'll still herald the wonderful Marion Cran as the first-ish BBC gardener.
I want to tell you about my little pond. It's been such a business. It's the little one, I mean, the one below the study window. At first it was a swamp of coarse grass.
So 11th of August 1923, the Birmingham station then moves from Whitton to the city centre itself. And here, of course, they have access to the concerts, music halls, via a cable or two, which is a lot easier to lay when you're in the middle of the city centre than on the outskirts. The Western Electric transmitter was removed from Whitton and installed then at Summer Lane Power Station with a sausage aerial slung between its two chimneys. Don't know how big this sausage was. A.E. Thompson, the engineer, wrote in the Electrical Communication Journal, "Complete dismantling of the equipment and fresh adjustments when again set up, carried out in less than 20 hours, commenced after the regular evening programme from Whitton, which concluded at 10:30 p.m, and at 6 p.m. next day the well-known call sign was heard as usual.
Hello, this is 5IT.
But this time from a new home. And the new studio then was 30 foot by 20 foot. It was carpeted and draped to get rid of all the echoes. Here's A.E. Thompson.
We draped all the walls. Of course, we naturally went too far. We hung it on the ceiling and we hung it on the walls and we had a thick carpet on the floor. And the result of all that was, of course, that everything was as dead as can be.
They had a microphone, an amplifier, an organ, grand piano, gramophone, tubular bells, just like London, and a small wooden platform for the singer or speaker, just to ground them, really. It locates the artiste before the microphone and prevents those with a dramatic tendency from moving about the studio.
Which some of them did. We had a soubrette from the Aston Theatre Royal one night, and for every refrain to her song, she walked up and down the studio doing a stage routine, with the studio manager following her with a microphone trying to catch what she was singing about. It was very amusing.
Upon a wall panel is mounted the transmitter jack and switch, a telephone to facilitate liaison between studio and control room, and a series of coloured lamps for indicating the following: all correct, come closer, move back, rearrange, wait, and speak. When the microphone is on the air, a large red lamp is lighted. Yeah, the other coloured lamps, though, we have lost. So like Manchester, the new Birmingham studio lasted a while, but not long, a little bit longer than Manchester. 2.5 years they made it, by which time it was called hopelessly inadequate. Well, that was according to the 1972 BBC Engineering Guide. Then in 1926 it moved to Broad Street until Broadcasting House came along. So Birmingham by now was broadcasting from 3:30 to 4:30 and then from 5:30 until 10:30 at night, and Sunday evenings from 8:30 till 10. Afternoon programmes, it said, were really for the trade more than anything, because how can you sell radios if there's nothing actually to play them? So if you go to your local radio stockist in the afternoon at the right time, you can hear something. If you go in the morning, you can look at the box, but you can't hear much. Women's Corner was 5:30 till 6, when papers on dress and cookery subjects, etc. are read. During Children's Corner, 6 p.m. to 6:45 p.m, the staff become uncles and aunts and entertain their tiny listeners with humorous backchat, fairy stories and so on. And indeed they had themed nights, so from 7:30 you'd find on a Monday opera from the BNO, Tuesday dance music or a concert party, Wednesday choral music, often with a landline transmission from a cinema with a nice orchestra there. Request items on a Thursday, classical music on a Friday by a station orchestra, which is 14 strong, military bands on Saturday, Sunday religious talk and sacred music potentially. Well, we mentioned A.E. Thompson, the engineer who moved from Whitton to the Birmingham City Centre studio. He and Percy Edgar were two of the most popular children's broadcasters anywhere in the country. Only in the Birmingham area, but they were so popular there that really counts. By now, they were actually doing live events.
We were invited to go along to the town hall and give the children's hour from the platform of the town hall so that the children could actually see the two uncles. And I must say that the town hall was absolutely filled with the families there. And I think that was my most nervous experience. I mean, I was never nervous broadcasting in the studio, but by golly, I was nervous when I had to do that act on the stage. Of course, Percy Edgar was all right because he had done it before. But
I had had a long and, I hope in all modesty, a fairly successful career on the stage, the music hall and theatrical stage, and also, of course, as a concert director. That experience over a number of years helped me considerably to give the public what I thought it wanted in the way of entertainment.
To me, it was a new thing, doing it before an audience.
And Uncle Edgar and Uncle Thompson had a clever way of delineating which letters from children were for which presenter.
Another thing we did, we had the bright idea of getting the children to write letters to us and tell us what they thought about the programme. And we soon began to receive hundreds of letters, of course, and it was quite a job sorting them out. Then we had another brainwave, and I said to Percy Edgar one evening, I said, Uncle Edgar, I like this pink notepaper, don't you? And he said, well, I prefer blue notepaper, really. Oh, I said, do you? Oh, no. I said, I prefer my letters on pink notepaper. Oh, no, he said, I like mine on blue. Well, believe it or not, after that, we used to always have two piles of letters, and one was always pink and the other was always blue. So we knew at once there was no sorting required. We knew which letters were intended for Uncle Edgar and which for Uncle Tom.
The children used to write in quite a lot.
One of the Birmingham engineers was Jack Cooper.
And we were obviously very popular with all of them. We used to sell postcard photographs of ourselves to the children and raise funds that way to provide radio sets in hospitals.
They inaugurated the Radio Circle, which spread throughout many of the BBC stations, to give a kind of children's club and gain even more listeners. Here's Uncle Thompson.
We formed the Radio Circle. It was an idea we put over to the children that we were forming a radio circle, and we would like them to be members. And the idea was that they would send along a small donation so that we, as soon as it began to grow, we could send it to distribute it to hospitals. And the idea was that we would like to have a bed endowed called the Children's Radio Circle.
Sounds like the origins of Children in Need. You'd pay a membership fee of £1, later replaced by an annual subscription. You get a badge, a certificate, maybe something on your birthday or a shout-out. January 1923 is where Children's Hour started doing birthday greetings, and soon that filled a large part of the programme. In fact, they started adding a strict time limit by 1924 because there were so many requests. Greetings to sick children were given the priority.
All the uncles and aunts, that is the members of the staff, wore a badge with 5IT, which is the station call sign in the centre of it, and Radio Circle round the outside. The uncles and aunts had silver badges, and the children, the nephews and nieces, had gold-coloured badges. And if you were wearing your badge and you saw an uncle or an aunt in the street, you could go up to them and say, hello, uncle, or whatever, and start a conversation.
And the Radio Circle badges still sell well on eBay today, often under different names like Radio Sunbeams, depending on the station. 5-0 Newcastles were called Gloopers, and they had a motto, Smile. No entry fee is necessary, but members are invited voluntarily to subscribe 1 or more shillings to the Chronicles Sunshine Fund for the relief of distress among poor children and others. Some had links with fairies, the Fairy League, the Fairy Flower League, these particularly linked with the natural world, that fairies could be found there within the flowers and shrubs of our own garden. Marion Cran would be very proud.
Hard to hear in the roar of these latter days. I want to tell you about my little palm.
The radio circles lasted until 1934, by which point the costs were slightly outweighing how much they would gain. Now, we haven't quite finished August of 1923. In late August, we find simultaneous broadcasting, Irish broadcasting as well, and the Sykes Inquiry. More of that on another episode. But one final thing for this time. 16th of August 1923, according to our friend of the show, comedy historian Alan Stafford, is the birth of topical comedy on the BBC.
The next time there's any experimenting to be done with elephants, I shall not be present.
John Henry, of whom, of course, Alan Stafford is the definitive expert, with his biography of John Henry, Bigamy Killed the Radio Star. Get it now, folks. And Alan reckons that 16th of August 1923, the broadcast of John Henry's Wireless Elephant is really the first topical comedy, because this tale of borrowing an elephant from the local zoo actually spoofs what the BBC was doing elsewhere. 8th of August 23, a bold experiment with an elephant. The elephant with the loudspeaker and a receiving set on its back.
And I thought I'd experiment to see if it'd obey orders given by wireless.
Early August 1923, the BBC had tried to broadcast an elephant from the zoo, obeying commands, and unfortunately the elephant not obliging. The elephant took no notice, so John Henry thought that he would have some fun with it. So here is John Henry talking about his friend Percy, the elephant.
Of course I hadn't an elephant, but I went to the zoo, and the gentleman there asked what I wanted. I said I want to borrow an elephant. He said, what for? I said, the sacred cause of science. He said, what's your name? I said, John Henry. He said, I've heard of you, so I'll lend you an elephant. He's trampled 2 men to death already, and he told the keeper to bring forth Percy. They wouldn't let me take Percy on the tram, so we had to walk, and we were both very much admired. Now my flat's on the top floor, and I had a bit of bother getting Percy up there, and anyhow they couldn't blame me for the walls because they always were weak. But I blame Percy for my door. That was his fault. He ought to have breathed in a bit. Still he was up there, so I started the experiment. I only have a crystal set, so I put the earpieces on Percy and went to give the first word of command. That was, lie down. And I'll give Percy credit, he did lie down. But I can never forgive the woman who lived underneath. As I told her, I wasn't responsible for the floor being weak. And if she'd been in the bed when Percy fell on it, she'd have had something to grumble at. And while she was talking, her floor gave way too, and we all went through into the basement. And the last I saw of Percy, he was sprinting towards the setting sun with my earpieces on, and the old lady's bedstead dangling coquettishly from his shoulders.
So thanks Alan Stafford for that, and his book, of course, is highly recommended. It's from Phantom Publishing, and it's Bigamy Killed the Radio Star, the biography of John Henry. Well, that's it for this episode then. We've gone to Birmingham, Manchester, Scotland, and we've tried to get an elephant up the stairs. The magic of audio. Next few episodes then, we'll be looking at simultaneous broadcasting, which is the networking of events and how that transformed early BBC, the results of the Sykes Report, what the government thought the BBC should be from then on. Plus, we've got guests including Dr. Inya Stanovic of the Early Recording Association. We've got Mary English, former BBC producer, talking about her career. We'll be celebrating Godfrey Isaacs, the head of the Marconi Company, looking at the Savoy Orpheans Dance Band and the early radio times. Plus, of course, coming up, our 100th episode. So what will you want to add to the British Broadcasting Century's century? If you'd like to write some words or record some audio, your favourite moment of early broadcasting. Record something, write something, ping it to us, paul@paulcarenza.com. Link in the show notes to that, and I would love to get your voice or your words on our 100th episode. Lastly, we've just joined Substack, so if you'd like some long-form blog-type posting, do find me as Paul Carenza on Substack, waffling away about British broadcasting's past, present and future. My first one there is on the history of the BBC concert hall / radio theatre / World War II dormitory, and I'll try and post there every couple of weeks or so. And don't forget, for more behind-the-scenesy things, patreon.com/Paul Carenza gives you monthly writings, videos. Our latest post on Patreon, a reading from the first book on broadcasting, Cecil Lewis's 1924 book, Broadcasting from Within, in which he rather evocatively and emotionally tells the tale of being an announcer, but then walking home anonymously at the end of the day, passing lighted windows, thinking, I've just been speaking to you, but you'll never know. It's a beautiful piece of writing, I think. If you'd like to see me dissect it further, then the video there is on patreon.com/paulcarenza. £5 a month, cancel anytime you like, and welcome Simon Rooks, our newest patron. Thank you, Simon, and thank you to all who have contributed, past, present or future, whether it's that or sharing this episode. Next time, the British broadcasting century becomes the Irish broadcasting century. From the 11th of August 1923, when the Marconi Company once again enter the fray and give us, very briefly, some broadcasting from Dublin. It's quite a tale. The author Eddie Bowen brings it to us. Do seek out his books if they do not already grace your bookshelves. And join us next time. The British Broadcasting Century is presented and produced by me, Paul Carenza, with original music by Will Farmer. Thank you to our newspaper detective Andrew Barker for the newspapers, to Graham Stewart for the Glasgow contributions, to Dr. Zara Healy for her insight into the Children's Hour and Radio Circle, and to Alan Stafford for his John Henry info, and of course to the present-day BBC, the Written Archive Centre especially, and any BBC copyright content reproduced is courtesy of the British Broadcasting Corporation. All rights are reserved. Every last one, although we try to use clips that are beyond copyright due to their age, so do treat them with care. Here to inform, educate and entertain. Do join us for the Irish Broadcasting Century next time on the British Broadcasting Century.